Good morning, viewers. Welcome to yet another episode of Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee, a feature of Council for Strategic Affairs. Today is Monday, October 28th. It is around a couple of minutes before 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it is around 3:30 p.m., couple of minutes around in India. The distinguished guest we are going to be speaking today in this conversation is Lieutenant General Dr. Rakesh Sharma. For our viewers, Lieutenant General Dr. Rakesh Sharma was commissioned in Gorkha Rifles in 1977. He had a sprawling career in Army over 40 years. He has had extensive operational experience in Jammu and Kashmir, in the northeast of India, as well as on the western borders. He had trained the Botswana Army for 3 years in Africa and had attended the National War College at Abuja in Nigeria. He also attended the NDC at New Delhi. He was a research fellow at Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis and has done his PhD in defense studies. General Rakesh Sharma commanded the Fire and Fury Corps in Ladakh, facing both China and Pakistan. He was the Adjutant General responsible for the human resources management of the Indian Army. He is a regular participant in seminars, lectures in various institutions, and regularly writes for newspapers and military journals. He currently holds General Vipin Rawat Chair of Excellence at the USI, New Delhi, the oldest military think tank in India. He is also on the Executive Council of the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. He also serves as Distinguished Fellow with Vivekananda International Foundation and the Center for Land Warfare Studies, or the CLAWS. So, without further ado, let me invite General Rakesh Sharma for this conversation. So, welcome to our platform.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. I'm honored.
And we will be talking to you about the situation on the LAC, on India-Tibet border. And I know that you have covered this issue serially over the years with numerous publications, the latest being in Deccan Herald that I read with very keen interest. And you have made a pitch that despite this agreement, which has not been made fully public, there is need to continue to stay vigilant on the LAC. So, sir, give some opening comments from you on this particular issue.
Thank you once again, Dr. Adityanjee. It is a great honor to be back on your show, and always a privilege.
So there's some problem with your voice.
Can I be heard, sir?
General Sharma, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. So India and China did not enjoy a border between each other for centuries, not even after independence, till China came and occupied Xinjiang and Tibet. And subsequently, there is, of course, long history to what has happened, and we all have been debating this issue for last now 4 years and more. The fact of the matter is that there is a agreement being arrived at between India and China recently, after 4.5 years of standoff that we have had in Eastern Ladakh. Now, having said that, agreement, while India has called it agreement, the Chinese write-ups and Chinese have not used the word agreement at all. They are referring to largely as resolution. And full details not come out as yet. There are some details available, so we have been able to glean through as to what's going to happen hereafter. Now, what happened 4.5 years ago did not happen on 4.5 years ago alone. There was a build-up for over 10 years in which there were tensions rising, slow and steady, where the Chinese have done longest standoffs. In 2013, it was for a period of 22 days. Later, Doklam, it was 72 days. And those have been elongated standoffs that we have had with China, which actually was telling us that the treaties and the agreements and the CBMs and the protocols that we had signed between 1993 and 2013 were gradually withering away. They were losing their efficacy, because by the CBMs alone, we shouldn't have a 22-day standoff or a 72-day standoff, because you are supposed to disengage and go back to your post on as per the protocols laid down. But it was problematic. But these were all in isolated places. What happened in 2020 was absolutely different. What the Chinese, the PLA did is they came over a very large front, the entire front of the Eastern Ladakh nearly, and they denied us patrolling over a large front, especially in the Exaichen area, and of course in the area of Demchok, and caused and refused to go back. They also, to protect themselves, brought large amount of force from Xinjiang, from the Taklamakan desert, and they brought and placed it closer to the borders. It is as if to tell that please do not escalate the situation. We have larger forces here behind our back before we did our operation. So all was premeditated, it was pre-planned, it was expansionist, as one can say, and the Chinese stuck to the guns. Subsequently, as you're aware, there were large amount of discussions between the foreign ministers, meeting at various places from September 2020 onwards. The defense minister met once. There were meetings of the diplomatic WMCC committee, which is between the Ministry of External Affairs in India and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China. They met about 16 times since 2020. And there was a process started of the Corps Commanders talks, which had 21 rounds starting June 2020 till beginning of this year. In the course of this one, some kind of agreements were arrived at, for which what I would say buffers were created. Now, buffer is not an official language, but in many places there were temporary moratoriums on patrolling created, which meant it could be any distance. It could be 2 kilometers at some places and 8 kilometers in some places, where there was a moratorium, temporary moratorium on patrollings created in various places, where they were forces were deployed on both sides of that so-called buffer zones, and it became willy-nilly, instead of a line of actual control, it became a belt of actual control, except in the area of Depsang and the area of Demchok, where the forces remained kind of eyeball to eyeball. In between, as you recollect, there was an operation carried out by Indian Army on Kailash Range in August 2020. That operation was subsequently called off, and they were amicably forces moved back from their locations in 2021, and that area also became kind of a buffer zone. Now I come to today as what has been arrived at. So, as I mentioned, that what Chinese did in 2020, they denied us total patrolling on the Depsang Plateau, which from various places that we could do, each one of these places were denied. And we were able to, and in the doing so, the Chinese did not relent and did not move back. They stood on their guns on the kind of the watershed of that rivers that were there existing in eastern Ladakh. That denying of patrolling, actually, we lost a foothold of patrolling that we were doing in so-called patrol points, which now everybody knows about, in the Depsang Plateau between 9 and 13, which we used to patrol at regular intervals, and that was denied to us. Having said that, now what transpires is that there has been agreement on Depsang Plateau. First is Depsang Plateau. There's been agreement being carried out. That agreement implies, and I will say so, that I'll start by saying so, this is a very positive development. It's a plus being carried out between the two countries, which are civilizational states. We should sit down together and devise the rules and devise the methodology. So it's a positive step that has happened. But in the Depsang area, the Chinese are seemingly permitting us to go to the patrol points that we were visiting earlier. So in the Depsang, the way is to a rivulet or a nala, which is called Raki Nala. And Raki Nala, there is a bottleneck, means, there is no road existing in that area. It's a tough area where the river flows. So we are sitting on one side of bottleneck and the Chinese are sitting on the other side, which is called a Y junction. Now, with patrolling being permitted here, we will be able to go across to the Depsang Plateau and we'll be able to patrol. There may be scheduling carried out, a time laid down between, say, some days we will do and some days Chinese will do, so that there are no fisticuffs happening and no fighting taking place. But the Chinese on their own side will also take a patrol to their claim line on our side in the same area, coming down from Depsang Plateau to a post called Burse, which has been their claim line, which we got a post of Indo-Tibetan Border Police there, close to our road access. So that they will also depart, and that would also take place in some kind of a program or a schedule where it is to be decided or to come across. This also implied that, a large amount of permanent habitat and, structures that we have created in this area, like we had created in area of outside of bottleneck, the Chinese had at the Y junction, those are being dismantled. But there are large number of other posts also which are visible on satellite imageries, which will fall onto the a route for patrolling. What happens to those with time will tell whether the Chinese will dismantle all this or we have to circumvent those places and go. So that's one part of the story, Depsang, that we will recommence the patrolling, hopefully end of this month, certainly beginning of next month. Now, in the Demchok Nala, things are not so clear as yet, even after all this has been carried out. There is a disengagement. There were face-to-face people stationary there. There were camps established, permanent habitat, but the habitat is now being wound up, and the forces in Demchok Nala will also disengage and go back. Having said this, that the implication are that there is a positive movement, and maybe this is a baby step, as one small step which has been taken, and there may be, once you succeed in this one, there may be next steps and next steps being carried out, because in the discussion that has happened between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi in Kazan, they have rejuvenated the SR mechanism, which is the special representative mechanism, in which India's NSA and the Foreign Minister of China used to deliberate earlier. That deliberations will restart. So that will be a political process starting again for discussion outside the realm of what the military and the diplomats are talking. So that's a plus being carried out. Maybe implication by implication that there may be some more steps being taken as time comes. Presently, taking on the face value of what has happened, yes, there is a positive development. However, Chinese have not moved away the forces that they brought from Xinjiang, and they were deployed there. And they have made extensive infrastructure on the entire Chinese front, not in Ladakh alone, but right up to Arunachal Pradesh, extensive infrastructure has been built in the course of last 4 years. We've also built substantive infrastructure. The forces are deployed not face to face, but close proximity to the border on both sides, India and China. And those forces are not moving because we contemplate that there is a threat in being. If you retain those forces, there is a threatening posture that is violative also of the previous agreements. So the previous agreements do not stand scrutiny because you are not supposed to keep these many forces in the close to the border, which implies that those agreements and protocols are kind of defunct. They are not relevant today. So new agreements have to be called for. That implies that the additional forces that we had brought on the plateau, in Ladakh and also in other parts of China border, cannot relent now at this juncture because the opposing forces are also deployed there. So there is no de-escalation taking place. Second point I wish to make here, sir, that the buffers. So there are a number of buffer zones, which are moratoriums and patrolling, that stand as they are standing, which means is that if the Chinese are sitting on a pass and we are sitting close by, maybe a gap of 3-4 kilometers, well, we can't patrol to the pass which we used to patrol earlier, maybe, and we are now, the buffer zones exist, which means all this time there is an anxiety that one of these, the Chinese may infringe the buffer zones and come down. As it is, drones are flying all over the place. So that atmosphere of tension is not being obviated. It still exists because the buffer zones exist. And third point I wish to raise, and I'll finish here, is the issue of trust. The trust between the forces on ground, and of course between the nations also, was resting on the agreements that we signed on 1993 to 2013, and which were for initial 15 years quite successful. Later, last 10 years, they have not been so successful. Now, after the Chinese did this expansionist attitude in 2020, what right would Chinese like to have from us to trust them that they won't do it again? They infringed all the agreements earlier and allowed us, forced us to take great measures over a 3,400 kilometers frontage in last 4 years. Now to say that there is just agreement signed and there would be trust developing and nothing will go wrong, I think that will be asking a little too much, because there is an anxiety in minds of people as to whether the Chinese will do an expansionism again in the same area. Dr. Adityanjee, yours.
So if we look at the history, China's word and China's signing agreement doesn't mean anything. They always renege these so-called agreements by saying that we signed those because we were weak at that point in time. So if history was any guide, was it not naivete on our part to take for granted the agreements that were signed between 1993 and 2013? Any comments on that?
Look, what started in actually 1981, when we started establishing joint working groups to start discussing issues. More so when Rajiv Gandhi visited in 1988, there was a movement on this issue, and then the discussion started. And during Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's time in 1993, the first peace and tranquility agreement was signed. Even that time, in our studies, we thought there will be movement to 1993 agreement further. The word LAC came up, line of actual control. Now, line of actual control, any word line implies there is a line on which one side, one country is there, other side, other country is there, a line. Now, this line of actual control, the terminology was incurably faulty. Even then, because we had a line in our mind, which we knew a line, which Chinese also would have understood, because we used to patrol to patrolling points in various areas, which actually indicated that we are coming close to the line of actual control. The Chinese have never declared their line of actual control. Even now, we don't know it. They talk about a 1959 line, which was referred to in a letter by Chow Enlai to Pandit Nehru. The line had no rationale, no logic, no legality, no basis, no historicity. On what basis that they drew a line and said this is the line? So that actually was infructuous as it is. There was no debate, no discussion. So 1993's Peace and Tranquility Agreement was great because we were breaking out of our shackles of license Raj, and we were wanting to expand our economy, and the Chinese were also trying to do so. It was essential to bring peace between two competing nations and come to an even keel. So 1993 and then 1996, which actually laid down excellent modalities as to why there should be no Guttam Gutta, no skirmishes, no fisticuffs, no. So they said, okay, we will show a banner, we will disengage, we'll go back. No forces will be brought so many kilometers close to the borders. So the agreement, the protocol laid down were deliberately made and nice. And again, then when Prime Minister Bajpayee went to China in 2003, if I'm not wrong, uh, again, it was a rapprochement. So to say that there was not a basis to believe that things were moving forward very slowly, but things were moving forward in relationships. And till 2008 and 2009, the agreements which we signed were succeeding. So, it was all okay. There were infringements, there were transgressions being carried out, there were intrusions, there were some fisticuffs, but they all detached. From Arunachal Pradesh to Ladakh, all this area was all things happening, but not serious. I would presume 2008, it became clear to the Chinese that they have taken off. After they joined the WTO in 2001, and the Western countries had gone through such quagmire in 2008 in that financial meltdown that the Americans and the Western countries had. The Chinese was unscathed, and Chinese thought that we are now on, as they say, pig's back, and we have reached a pinnacle. And India and China, which started with the nearly same GDP in 1981 or 78 or 81, and by that time, China had already taken off. So they knew that they had left India economically behind. And that means, of course, militarily, because all the money and all the comprehensive national power comes from there. So after 2008, 2009, and you turn 2010, it was evident that the skirmishes and the problems happening on the border were now being larger ones, and they were not very peaceful and detachment. So things were changing. When President Xi took over, he took over in 2013 as a president in February, March. And April, they did the first operation. Within 1 month of his taking over his presidency, he took a first operation in Depsang, where they made a 22-day standoff. It hadn't happened earlier. So I think till that time, in 2012, one could say that things were slightly heating up, but they were not that bad. And the agreements signed could have been deemed as positive steps. But after 2013 and then 2014 and 17, things were withering down, and it was clear that the agreement signed had actually lost their value or losing their value steadily. So I would say that a desire to bring peace between two nations was important, and it has been there for some time. But about 15 years ago, we should have taken cognizance of the fact that things were getting worse, and these agreements are now not so important. And I agree with you when you say the Chinese are known to, believe in agreements only till the time they want to believe in agreements. When they don't want to believe in agreement, that agreement is like a paper. It doesn't have a value. So we should have woken up to that score in time.
I think it's important for our viewers to understand that in Mandarin language, there's no character for transparency. There's no character. So it's not ingrained. Transparency is not ingrained. If you read Sun Tzu, deception is the chief mode by which China's military doctrine moves. So it's fruitless to think in terms of China respecting the agreements. And like you said, we are saying it is an agreement, they are saying it is resolution. They are already sowing the seeds of doubt in something which has not been made public. So we have to be very, very cautious. Now, the historical vicissitudes that you mentioned along the line of actual control and Chinese behavior, you did mention China's WTO accession in 2001. So nothing happens de novo, nothing happens in vacuum. You have to see that till 2003, India and China's defense budgets were almost identical. Maybe China was $5 billion US dollars higher than India. But each year, I saw that Chinese defense budget will jump by 20%, 30% of the previous year, whereas Indian defense budget almost for a decade remained static and stagnant. So not only there was asymmetry economically, there was asymmetry developing in GDP, but in terms of defense allocation, we were becoming weaker, whereas China's defense forces were becoming stronger. So that fact has to be kept in mind, because when they say that we sign the agreement when we are weak, when we are strong, we don't. Now, when Xi Jinping came, he came as redder than the red.
True.
His goal was China Dream, which is to establish Chinese hegemony, Chinese empire, and compete with the reigning superpower. So an example had to be made for India, and we should have taken that into consideration. And the last point I'll make is that China always looks for your adversary's weakest points. So there were incursions when new government took over in India in 2014, paralleling Xi Jinping's visit to India, they were Chinese incursions. They thought that it was a new government. And the thing I'm going to mention about 2020 Galwan issue, Chinese were very carefully watching the domestic situation in India. And we had pretty bad domestic situation in India. We had numerous agitations that were almost bordering towards anti-national. You had Shaheen Bagh, you had Kisan agitation, you had all this, problems in JNU. China watches very carefully how the government of the day is handling that situation. And their perception was that Indian government was at the weakest point. And you strike when your opponent is down and out. Any comments on that?
So there could be merit in your arguments, sir. But I would also say that we had shown strength many times in the same course of timing that you are referring to. We did a surgical strike, which was actually aggression into Pakistan. There was a strike by the aircraft in Balakot, and there was a 370 abrogation, which was one of the boldest steps that a government can take. It happened just before 2020, that is in August 2019. So the government, and that government was always rightist, it was well known that national security is an agenda with the government. And if anybody has been reading the manifestos of the government, the parties, it was clear that the agenda was strongly national security based. And therefore, Chinese are serious people. They won't do a mistake like that. I would presume that since the time President Xi had spoken about the Chinese dream, he also spoke that not an inch of territory left over by my forefathers will be shed. And then there was an issue of not territoriality or territorial problems between India and China. The Chinese media and the Chinese thinkers started talking of this area as part of their sovereignty, which says that, our 1959 line is a sovereign line without actually debating it. It is not a territorial dispute. So the content of their discussions and content of their arguments had been much enhanced in the course of a few years, in which they felt accordingly that they were able. And I agree with you that there may have been misconceptions or perceptions that they had militarily become very strong and they would be able to ward off a threat. Or maybe India will not be able to respond the way India responded. That may be errors of judgment. Maybe it was a calculated risk on their part to judge saying that, okay, let's do this and see what India does. Whether it was a calculated risk or was it foolhardiness, whichever way or the entire spectrum that you see, what the Chinese did also was relevant to the fact that they thought that they are the second superpower, becoming at least their PPP terms, they had become a superpower. They were the highest, largest economy in the world. That time, the COVID had also not come in, or COVID, okay, there were embers of COVID. And they thought they were reaching a pinnacle of glory. No two tigers on a mountain. The only challenger that they had in Asia to their supremacy was India. But India did not join their economic grouping called RCEP, did not join the BRI, stood on its own ground. There were relations developing with the United States. So, in many which ways, and if you placing yourself into Chinese shoes, it will look that India is becoming too big, not economically. Economically, we were still growing, coming to be the sixth and the fifth power. But we were taking stands which were not liked by the Chinese. So that second tiger on the mountain had to be displaced and tied down in any which way that you can tie them down so that the development can be stopped. And then, of course, there is that beautiful Indian peninsula, 2,000 kilometer jutting into the Indian Ocean. And of course, the Indian Navy, which all would be irking them tremendously. Because whatever you might say, that the Chinese dependent on Indian Ocean and the proximity areas of Indian subcontinent is there to see. So all that would have added up to say that it is time to tie India down into a manner that it is not able to break out of it. And probably they just misjudged it, that our response may be not so sturdy. And maybe we will accept the incursions the way they were and forget it. I mean, let's say there'll be some noise, but it will just die away like that.
So let me bring you back to your point about Xi Jinping doctrine, which is China dream and not an inch of territory that is held by our forefathers will be ceded. Again, I will say that when Xi Jinping came, he was described as redder than red. He is the second paramount leader.
Yeah.
After Chairman Mao. And if you look at Mao Zedong's or Mao Zedong's enunciations, well, he did say that Tibet is the palm of the hand. There are 5 fingers attached to the palm of the hand, and we have to take those 5 fingers. That statement has not gone unchallenged, either by PLA or by CPC or by any of China's so-called statesmen or academics. Nobody has ever challenged that statement of Mao Zedong. And that statement still stands. So we have to be very, very cautious in dealing with this imperialist power?
So, see, one can deliberate on this five fingers theory, which is attributed to Chairman Mao. But the fact of the matter is that this is not 1950s. This is 2024. In 2024, just the thought, even if they don't repudiate the statement made by Chairman Mao, but in 2024, to dream of taking the five fingers and amalgamating into your territory is a dream that will remain a dream. It can't be said that, of course, Chinese have made some encroachments and constructed some villages in Bhutan and some villages in Nepal. And there is controversy on especially in Bhutan as to what the Chinese have done. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't mean that you are expansionist by nature, a revanchist regime. A revanchist regime can go back to no logic whatsoever and no history whatsoever, and they decide to take their five fingers of mine. So what that they were said in 1950s. I don't think the relevance, and the Chinese will understand that they would become a pariah state in the world politics if they attempt to take in sovereign countries of the five fingers I'm referring to, which is Nepal, Bhutan, and the areas of India, in any way that they wish to take so. So I would say that they don't want to challenge what Chairman Mao said. But being a pragmatic nation, which Chinese are, they would understand that this is not a feasible phenomena in 2024 to take on major territories and major countries across as part of your some kind of a historic statement made and then stand by it. I don't think pragmatic Chinese will believe in this five-finger theory anymore. It will cause a major upheaval in global politics in case they try so.
Just to take the discussion further, this is how they operate. They create doubts in the minds, create imaginary claims, maximalist claims. Remember the 9-dash line, how long it has been there. And when they actually moved to take control of islands in the so-called South China Sea. So it is their nature that they will make maximalist claims. They will let it lay dormant and hide their strength and bide for the time. So you have to connect the dots. And again, we cannot be very certain that rationality will prevail, because when they are stronger, stronger than what they are now, they may again refer back to that claim. But I will bring you to another issue. You mentioned the SR mechanism being resumed after 5 years. And I have actually a lot of apprehension about this SR mechanism. It has been there for a long period of time. It did not actually yield any results. And in 2013, after Xi Jinping came to power, you know who was the SR? SR was Yang Jiechi.
Dai Bingo.
Yeah,
Bingo.
Dai Bingo, followed by Yang Jiechi.
Yang Jiechi was later foreign minister and then Politburo member.
He was a state councillor, which gives much more authority. So he was Minister of External Affairs as well as the state councillor. So that gives you a lot of authority and a lot of clout. And Yang Jiechi was the person who actually advanced the theory of wolf warriors. And in one of the Shangri-La dialogues in, I think, 2013 or 2014, he went on record to tell the ASEAN countries that reality is that China is a big country and you are small, and you have to learn to live with us. Basically giving threats that if you do not accede to our demands, things will happen. So you are dealing with somebody, you may have personal familiarity or personal, cordiality between the two reps, but that is only at a personal level. When it comes to actual fruit of these visits and all, it did not yield anything. and to rely exclusively on SR mechanism, because now your SR would be Wang Yi, who is basically a successor to the Wolf Warrior diplomacy. We saw that in US China sort of summit that happened almost 3 years ago when Joe Biden came to power, that both Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi gave a monologue to Anthony Blinken, a haranguing monologue. So I don't give a hoot to this SR mechanism because it distracts you.
Okay, Dr. Adityanjee, when the SR mechanism started, about 20 years ago, it was an alternative platform for political decision making. The NSA, who's a political appointee in India, and Daibingo, who initially took over, now he heads Sichuan University. And for a long time, Daibingo was as part heading it before Yan Yechi took over that place. Now, I do not know whether the formatting was right or whatever as time is processed. You're right that it did not produce the kind of results that one had hoped for in the SRs that they would format it. But now Mr. Wang Yi is not only the state councillor and he's also the foreign minister, he is also member of the Politburo Standing Committee, and he heads the foreign policy. He's the heads of the foreign policy think tank of the party. So he holds, while the government chair, he also holds the party head chair. So the power vested in Mr. Wang Yi is much more than powers vested only in the state councillor, which Mr. Wang Yi was before the last party congress. So I would say that let's hope. I mean, see, all these things time will tell us, and these are all, even people who are getting involved must be groping into how things will proceed. And I'll take a step also into the South China Sea. Frankly, if any country in the world, China has a worst maritime geography and one of the worst land geographies. The maritime geography, it has got inimical states all over the place. Despite the messaging of South China Sea, it has Japan, Korea's, it has Philippines, and it has the problem that it has with Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia. All these countries, despite Chinese overpowering use of financial power with any one of these ASEAN states, the problems on the South China Sea have not been obviated. Chinese have occupied large number of islands, as you rightly pointed out. They have 6-7 of them. They have converted into military bases, which they promised President Obama that they will not do. But they went back on the promise.
That actually brings my thesis that Chinese pronunciations, Chinese agreements are like toilet paper.
Yeah, so they have done that. Even that decision by the International Court of Arbitration in favor of Philippines on the Spratly Island, which they have not agreed to. We don't bother about such decisions. So all this is disdain. But what about today, sir? You follow as China as a student, as I follow a student. They have serious internal issues. Serious internal issues. They are this manufacturing powerhouse still. They create trade surpluses of $100 billion a month. And, very large number of countries are dependent on the trade that they get, including United States, of the stuff they get from China as the manufacturing powerhouse. But they have internal issues, serious internal issues. Unemployment, 18-20% unemployment is unheard of. Youth unemployment between 15 and 29 years. That's a very serious issue in any country if you have such youth unemployment. And if you follow many writings on the number of agitations that have taken place in China, well, it would look like our farm agitations and our CAA as minor. They have had so many agitations inside COVID itself. The agitations brought the government on knees to actually withdraw the entire COVID lockdown that they had. So to say that everybody public is becoming conformist, and the social contract that the CCP has with the public of China is still as strong as it used to be. I think there may be questions out here. So internal troubles, and the local governments are in dire straits economically, especially in matters of debt. Of course, the tier 2, tier 3 towns, the tier 4 towns are looking up. Okay, and the unemployment down, their credit ratings are getting better. So, but the major cities, is Shanghai or Beijing or Guangzhou and all, they are not doing as well. They are still in negative. So there is an internal issue out here, Chinese also. So while they would much like to find a win-win situation for them, like in the market in India, you see the tariffs that the United States have put on EVs, 100% tariff. Look at the tariff that the European Union put on EV vehicles, 35% tariff. After the real estate went down, the Chinese put their heart and soul into green energy industries, which is the solar or the or the EV vehicles or the batteries, very big way.
Your point is very well taken, sir. Your point is very well taken. But what is sustaining them is their foreign exchange reserve. If you combine China and Hong Kong region, their foreign exchange reserves are still more than $4 trillion, highest in the world. So they have some backup financial reserves that will hold them true. But your point is very well taken. Let me bring to preparedness on our side. Since 2014, there has been much more investment in our defense infrastructure, and in terms nominal dollar terms, our defense budget has risen. When the Mountain Strike Corps was planned, it was envisaged that it will have a strength of 90 to 95,000 soldiers. Are we there yet?
Good question. I don't know. I retired, so I don't know but my good guess is that, I mean, we did substantive work. Substantive work was carried out in raising the, I mean, what you call Mountain Strike Corps. It was a northern capability model that included not only the strike corps, but many other formations being raised, or many other units being raised for the entire front. It was from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh. So it was not a Mountain Strike Corps alone. Many of these formations, brigades, armored brigades were raised for this purpose. They may not correspond to a strike corps as we say a strike corps, but they provided much amount of depth to Ladakh, to Arunachal Pradesh, to central sector, and there was a serious reconfiguration of forces carried out in last 5 to 6 years. You know, where there were no reserves existing, the reserves were created, and substantial reserve. I'm not saying so. I'll not say about the 90,000 people, but I think the rebalancing or the reconfiguration of forces in India was done with great amount of judgment as to two fronts, both fronts requiring forces, one front, Western front, requiring to deter adversary, also because it was leading a proxy war, but the northern front, which is actually split into many parts. It's not a Indian side. It is not seamless. There is a Ladakh, there is a central sector, there is Sikkim, and then there is Arunachal Pradesh against one single adversary on the opposite side. They were detached or dedicated reserves so created as part of the northern capability model, which was substantive. And I assure you that it wasn't, I mean, it was pre-planned. And also add, that people say that issue of modernity. Chinese have 2,000, 3,000 cruise missiles, and they have now gone decades ahead in, say, modern technology, AI, and cyber, and machine learning, and quantum, and you name it. Now, indeed, they have they made great strides, and SP report says so that they are in 50s all technologies, they are leaders as against even much better than United States. But if you detach two issues, firstly the border, where Indian armed forces stand, and I can assure the listeners that they had the capacities to hold on to the border, great capacities. It's the issue of technology where we are now in fourth gear. And I think we are in a process of hastening our developmental processes towards technological part of warfare, which has taken leaps and bounds growth in the course of last 8 to 10 years. And there is where I think we need to push harder and harder to reach that level. It's not that we have not done. We have created a wide variety of missile forces, missile forces in the country, but there are arena where we need to work harder and come to some kind of an even keel.
In the same vein, while talking about building capacity and capabilities, I am citing a news article that appeared in the Hindu, citing the defense minister, came on August 6, 2024, which says there's a shortfall of 7,799 officers in Indian Army. And there's a shortfall of 1,08,685 soldiers in the army. How are we going to?
Yeah. So, Dr. Adityanjee, this is, some things have been carried little too far. Now we have about, say, 44,000 officers, and we are entitled to, say, 52,000 officers. Entitled means the strength, if we take the optimal of every unit, and if a unit is supposed to have 20 officers, they're holding 13, 14. So there's a shortfall of 7 per unit. So they will say, okay. Does it lose efficiency? Well, some efficiency will be lost. Where is the shortfall being accepted in the unit? Is it shortfall largely in infantry battalions or armored corps units or artillery units or fighting arms, or the shortfall is being spread over to many other like NCC units or logistics units? I think the officer shortfall is there, and we need to build it up, but it is not insurmountable that you can't do anything. The officer shortfall is an issue which is not so difficult in management of the force. The manpower become other issues. The JSU other rank becomes a separate issue, and there is where I would put it that pre-1990, pre-2020, if we had 1 lakh shortfall of troops, or 1 lakh plus, we would have been able to adjust to it, manage it. It is an issue of management of troops. Of the 12 lakh something army, if we are down to 11.5, well, it may be causing a little pinch now because of the Chinese issues that happened after 2020, and the large quantum of force that moved upwards, not only in Ladakh but all over the front, would be causing a little anxiety. And we have been, we are retired people, we are outside, have been raising these queries with the serving establishment that if there is a shortfall of manpower, how are we going to sort it out? And I think some management of this manpower work has been undertaken. And as one gathers it, a year or so, they will be able to fill these JSU other rank vacancies. I mean, there is work on. Largely, it also happened because 2 years of COVID, no recruitment took
There was
place.
no recruitment during COVID time.
Suddenly can't recruit, instead of 60,000, recruit 2 lakh people. You recruited, then when they come for promotional zone and the number of vacancies will be less, there will be problems to manage these people if you take a larger numbers together. So it has to be managed into a very fine arrangement being carried out by manpower planning. And I take it and I believe in it that this manpower planning would have worked at this and found out at what scale we intake people so that we are able to fill these vacancies, which will in as earlier time frame. This anxiety may be there in the minds of serving establishment also, specifically because You have to rotate people after 2 years. You know, in our system, a unit remains in super high altitude for 2 years, and it comes down. Another unit. The Chinese, you know, the conscripted soldiers stay lifelong or whatever time they do in Tibet itself or Xinjiang itself. So there is a cultural change out here between what the Chinese forces do and what we do. We all are social beings. We have social commitments. I have a father, my mother to look after. I have my family. I want to develop my family, made a house. We are socially important. Peace tenure also socially important to us. So I'm sure this issue, which is important, which you raise is very important, but the issue is also being addressed because we ourselves have queried this issue from the serving establishment.
Well, the only last comment I'll make, and it may be somewhat cynical, but I kind of hold on to it. That is never trust Chinese. You can talk to them. There's no harm in talking, but don't take their word for granted, because they are in every instance they renege and they backstab, and not just with India. So you have to understand their quote unquote national psyche and modus operandi before making any long-term commitments with this expansionist regime. Your thoughts on that?
So I agree with you. I mean, in fact, this is my views of similarly, saying that while we must endeavor to get peace on the borders, but not at the loss of our own sovereign territory. What we is our sovereign territory is our sovereign territory, and therefore, to guard the territory is our responsibility given to the armed forces by the government of India and by the Constitution of India. So we have to do that. Now, we have seen that the Chinese have taken advantage where, you know, even after 2020, they came to Yangtze, they came to Rakula, they may have come to other areas also. So the fact of the matter is that if you ask somebody, if you ask me, is China a satisfied nation as far as India-Tibet border is concerned? I'd say no, China is not a satisfied nation as far as India-Tibet border is concerned. They are not a satisfied nation. The dissatisfaction, how does it come about subsequently? We don't know. And you know, the public will logically ask questions that what the issue that you're raising, Dr. Adityanjee, rightly, that if the Chinese again show similar 2020 or 2013 or 2017, then the public will logically ask you, why did you have faith on them? Why did you trust them and why did you withdraw their forces from there? Therefore, till the time there is a political settlement of an international boundary which is recognized world over, which is a long-term dream, I don't think we need to relent. It will stretch us. It will stretch the armed forces greatly, but that doesn't allow us to relent because we have been, to put it mildly, stabbed. So once bitten, we must not allow ourselves to be bitten again.
Thank you very much indeed, Lieutenant General Sharma, for coming to our platform, enlightening our viewers, and again, sending a kind of warning to the defense establishment. Don't let the guard down ever. Don't let the guard down ever. It was pleasant, very pleasant indeed to talk to you. I got educated. I hope that you'll continue to come on our platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Honored. Thank you.
Nice.